Good afternoon, everyone. Just a little bit correction. What I'm going to speak about has nothing to do with aging population. All right. While many of us are very concerned about housing, because this is very close to heart, that's only natural. But I think we also need to see about the built environment for our businesses. So I'm very glad to be here this afternoon to share with you our views on the built environment and how these cater to our businesses, particularly the SMEs in the industrial sector. Now, related to the long-term planning for the urban landscape for Singapore, the government has committed to ensure that the built environment supports a very vibrant economy as well as one that actually provides good job opportunities. Related to this, the government has, in January this year, actually released a land use plan 2013. And in this plan, the government states that it will create new manufacturing areas in Woodlands, in Pasir Ris, Sengkang West, Lorong Halus, and also in the newly reclaimed areas in Tuas. It has also committed, in addition to expanding the existing city centre, it will also create and grow new commercial hubs outside of the city centre, and these are capable of providing some more than 13 million square meters of commercial space. All these are very exciting and well and good for Singapore over the long term. But we feel that what is more important is to ensure that the built environment is suitable and the built-up space is suitable for our businesses, including those in our industrial SMEs. So let's take a look at the outline of my presentation. The whole crux of it revolves around whether or not our space would be suitable for our businesses. First of all, we'll look at the challenges, or rather the changing phase of manufacturing. We'll also look at how this has impact on the real estate needs of our industrialists. Of course, what are then the resulting challenges that we see in the market? And how do we overcome these challenges? First of all, the changing phase of manufacturing. We all know that manufacturing is a very key driver of Singapore's economy. It contributes close to a quarter to our Singapore's GDP. And in last year, early November last year, PM Lee states that the manufacturing sector will remain a strong pillar for Singapore's economy even as it evolves. True enough, our manufacturing sector has evolved over the last few decades, and it has actually go up the ladder, go up the value chain. Today, the PMD also mentioned that the manufacturing sector also integrates well with our services sector, it integrates well with innovation, and at the same time, again, it also broadens our economic base such that the economy is not overly dependent on one single sector. In the same month of November, towards the end of the month last year, McKinsey Global Institute, the research arm of McKinsey & Company, released a report entitled Manufacturing the Future, the Next Era of Growth Globally and Next Era of Global Growth and Innovation. That's a tongue twister, I'm sorry. The key thrust of this report maintains that manufacturing will become or will remain a key driver of growth globally. At the same time, it also maintains that there are dramatic opportunities for industrialists as well as manufacturing nations to capitalize upon and to pull together these trends, the new trends that are shaping the industry. But perhaps the most compelling aspects of this report is the assertion that manufacturing, the definition for manufacturing has changed. The other point is that the division or distinction between manufacturing and services has blurred. So what does the phrase, the distinction between manufacturing and services has blurred mean? First of all, it states that the growth and services, it's kind of difficult for me to read this, I'm so sorry, just let me The phrase means that the growth of service jobs and service inputs in manufacturing makes manufacturing and services divide anachronistic or outdated. Similarly, in a world of global supply chains, an accurate accounting of value added must include intermediate inputs of services involved in manufacturing. At the same time, the traditional manufacturing services perspective does not account for the synergies between the two economic realms, how each creates demand and employment in each other. And of course, the old manufacturing services divide obscures a complete and accurate view of the role of manufacturing in the new economy. What we know today is that manufacturing has evolved. The landscape today that we see is such that manufacturing and services are closely integrated with each other. According to the McKinsey report, these are the key features characterizing this ongoing, unrelenting global paradigm shift. Manufacturing has always included a range of activities, and such that service-like activities have become a larger part of what manufacturing companies do. For example, your product design, product testing, R&D, customer support, sales services. At the same time, manufacturing companies rely on a multitude of service providers to produce their goods. Also, manufacturing exports embody uncounted service exports. When a finished product gets exported, along with it goes the supporting services, for example, your customer support services. Then, manufacturing and services are synergistic and both have strong multiplier effects. And an important trend that we've seen is that risk sharing with suppliers is becoming more common, and that outsourcing is increasingly being driven by the need to be flexible in addition to just cost as well as competency reasons. I think at this point in time, probably if we have industrialists or SME businesses out there, you may have been able to identify with such trends. And you can see that the phrase whereby the report exerts that the divide between manufacturing and services has blurred, this cannot be better articulated. Perhaps most of us have already experienced or actually observed it. And because manufacturing has always involved or included a range of activities, including the service-like kind of activities, not only have the manufacturing business model changed for businesses, but the employment structure has also changed. According to the McKinsey report, about 34% of US jobs in the manufacturing sector were actually in more service-like occupation, and that was in 2012. This was up from 32% in 2002. At the same time, this chart shows that some 30 to 55% of all manufacturing jobs in advanced economies are actually in more service-like occupation as well. In addition, what is interesting to note is that some 25% of the outputs that we've seen in the manufacturing sector involve service inputs. So we can see that there's a close interrelation between manufacturing and services. So indeed, what has been highlighted in the report is actually a stark and unabashed reflection of the reality in the manufacturing sectors all over the world. And Singapore needs to be fully prepared to embrace this paradigm shift in order to make itself more relevant and competitive when measured against industrialized nations. Now, this is especially important because our PM Lee has already mentioned that Singapore's manufacturing sector will remain a key foundation piece of our economy going forward. Excuse me. Now, with the change in the manufacturing sector all over the world and in Singapore, there is now for us to review the adequacy of our current land use, planning, and usage definitions in the industrial sector, and whether or not they are still relevant and still relevant to our economy, relevant to our business in all aspects in the new economy. It is also therefore critical to ensure that the planning guidelines, the land usage definitions are actually functioning or facilitating the provision of space, and more importantly, the provision of adequate and usable as well as relevant space for our industries. Otherwise, there could be a mismatch in our land resources, given the fact that our land resources is scarce. The real estate needs of our industrialists have changed and modernized along with our economy and our manufacturing sector. Back in the 1960s, as you can see here, the traditional or conventional factories and warehouses have been able to cater to the industries who were mainly concerned with manufacturing, production, and assembly. However, since the 1980s, with the industrialization change, the manufacturing evolution, we have also seen that the needs of our real estate, the real estate needs of our industrialists have also changed from one of basic to more sophisticated, and to one that is whereby the buildings are better specified in the form of high-specs industrial space or business park space. This chart shows simple profiling based on the latest available statistics on our SMEs, and this is from the Singapore Statistics, Department of Statistics. This shows that about 5%, only a mere 5% of our SMEs are actually involved in pure mainstream manufacturing. Instead, a larger proportion of them are actually involved in wholesale and retail trades, real estate and business services, as well as community, social, and personal services. Again, this supports the notion that our industries have actually moved up the value chain, and not only that, the real estate needs of these SMEs have also changed over time. This diagram shows a very simple representation of a product life cycle and the types of industrial space that goes into supporting a product production over each phase. Typically, in the initial stage, in product design, innovation, R&D, these are typically carried out in environments that are conducive for such activities, such as business parks or industrial, high-tech industrial space. The sourcing of raw materials, storing of them, manufacturing and assembly, as well as ultimately distribution of these finished products are actually carried out in our factories as well as warehouses. Other supporting functions are actually carried out in either within the same premises as the industrial premises or in other office components. However, because of the new economy and how the manufacturing sector has evolved, business models have also changed, and the way some of these functions are being carried out in the industrial premises have also changed. And this has somehow brought about some challenges in the market or what we've seen as misuse of industrial premises. And because really there has been an emergence of grey areas under the current definitions of industrial usage. And yet at the same time, there seems to be like the way in which our scarce land resources is being zoned and how industrial usage is being defined in Singapore today still seem to bear some kind of an outdated notion of a clear cut and dried division between manufacturing and essential services. Many of the regulations with regards to planning or guidelines have been in place many years ago. I remember learning about them when I was in school, when I first studied about this industry, and that was quite many years ago. I am much older now, but some of these guidelines are still unchanged. If we were to constantly update and upgrade ourselves, don't you think these guidelines ought to be updated as well? And because of this, there is probably a gap in the understanding of how manufacturing landscape has evolved and how the business models have also changed, and probably this gap on the part of the policymakers have actually again resulted in some challenges in the market in the form of unauthorized users in industrial premises. By this, we exclude the blatant, outright, clear-cut unauthorized users in the form of tour agencies, maid agencies, or tuition agencies. What we are most concerned with are the kinds of activities and functions that fall into the grey area under the current planning as well as usage definitions. And of course, along with this gap, there are other factors that contribute to the misuse of industrial premises. Let's take a look. First and foremost is the growth in population. I think Dr. Chua earlier on also mentioned about real estate is a product because it's a derived demand product, and because of the spurt in population growth since 2005, because of Singapore's open door immigration policy, we have also seen an increase to get along with this increase in population, a surge in increase in demand for goods and services. And this again then translate into growth in both the manufacturing and services industries. And in turn, these industries need space to operate in, both in the industrial sector as well as in the commercial sector. Bear this in mind as we go along. Then, there's the evolution of business models. Because of this evolution on the back of changes in the manufacturing sector, we have seen that industrial premises have actually been used by companies or firms whose activities do not strictly relate or link to the pure manufacturing activities. Traditionally, our industrial SMEs are actually involved in pure mainstream manufacturing production and assembly activities. At the same time, they also engage in they carry out some other forms of functions, such as customer support, material sourcing, so on and so forth. And these other functions are carried out within the same premises of the manufacturing activity, and they exist as ancillary components. However, with the evolution in the manufacturing sector as well as the changes in business models, some of these companies have begun to outsource these functions. And in fact, many of our SMEs today have actually gone up the value chain and are no longer just focused on pure manufacturing. The gap in the understanding of how manufacturing has changed and how business models have changed will only be exacerbated by the increasing trend towards specialization and outsourcing. Remember, we discussed that risk sharing with suppliers is now becoming more common, and that outsourcing is increasingly being driven by the fact that they need to be flexible in addition to cost and competency reasons. Now many of our SMEs are actually subcontractors to larger companies as well as MNCs. They are involved in one or two aspects of this bigger company's entire manufacturing process. So, because they are involved in this part of this process of the larger companies, it would then be erroneous to assume or to view that the processes or the operations of these SMEs are stand-alone processes that do not amount to any part of a finished product of the larger companies, especially so if the use of computers and technology gives the impression that those activities are better suited for office space and not industrial space. Do you agree? Case in point, in land-scarce Singapore, there is limited land available for the manufacturing of precast components for the construction sector. But the engineers who are involved, who are actually the intellectual element of this entire designing of these precast components, they contribute at a very critical level of the entire manufacturing process. Will the work of these engineers be considered as authorized in industrial premises, whereby their main core activity is an intrinsic and very fundamental part of the entire manufacturing process? So, will the work of our SMEs be deemed as unauthorized because technology has removed the physical part of the so-called manufacturing that is associated with the industries of the past era? Food for thought. At the same time, overseas manufacturing companies are also seeking presence in Singapore, setting up sales, services, as well as control headquarters in Singapore. This shows that this is a global trend. And how do our authorities see this trend, especially from overseas manufacturers? Another important aspect of business evolution, the evolution of business models, is the need for business continuity planning. We actually see that there are back-end operations set up by some established financial institutions, and this is part and parcel of crisis management as well as business continuity planning. Many of them exist in our business parks. Again, how do our authority view this? This is indeed another prevailing trend. Then, there's an issue of an outdated and outmoded land use zoning, industrial usage definition. This issue is more pronounced because of the ever-changing and constantly evolving manufacturing sector and changing business models. As such, there is a need for review. There is also a growing challenge concerning the difference between manufacturing and industrial activities in Business 1 space. Business 1, very simply, it is a zoning that classifies light and non-pollutive industrial uses. Then there's a mandatory requirement that all industrial space in Singapore need to set aside 60% of the gross floor area or GFA for manufacturing activities. And only a maximum of 40% is allowed for other supporting functions. At this juncture, I would like to highlight that perhaps our policymakers need to understand that this 60%, 40% control on usage on GFA will only continue to stifle the dynamism of our SMEs and creative enterprises in the new economy. Meanwhile, the trend in the market is apparent to developers. In the private sector, in the industrial property market, let's take a look at B1 space. Developers have been better able to accommodate and to cater to industrialists. We see that the buildings are now designed such that they are capable of accommodating the expertise, the intellectual expertise, creative personnel, as well as the higher level activities in such premises. And at the same time, they are also looking a lot more like commercial properties these days. All right, and some of these are also equipped with lifestyle components such as restaurants, gyms, fitness centers, and even swimming pools. But clear as daylight, these are actually the form of premises, the type of premises that the market needs, because the developers are responding to the market and providing what the market needs. So, at the same time, with regards to the end users, many potential buyers and occupants of B1 space out there do not understand or do not appreciate the allowable uses associated with industrial usage as defined under current B1 guidelines. The fact that industrial space was then zoned as industry back in those days under the 1998 Master Plan, and then rezoned as Business 1 under the 2003 Master Plan. This change has, and this branding or zoning of such industrial space will only exacerbate the erroneous impression that Business 1 space is meant for business. Then, by classifying industrial space or B1 space as B1, and then again, on the other hand, stipulating that at least 60% of this GFA must be set aside for pure manufacturing activities of the past era, it only shows that our SMEs today, or occupants today, are stuck between a rock and a hard place, not knowing whether or not their activities will run afoul of the government's planning guidelines under today's context. If the government should act to the letter of the law that they have laid down in terms of planning guidelines under the B1 definitions of today, then many of the occupants in B1 space today will risk having their operations compromised through possible eviction. Again, this shows that there's a lack of understanding of what is happening in the market, what's happening in the manufacturing sector, and what are the real demands in the market. And because of this, planning efforts could be futile, and therefore the scarce land resources could not be channeled to efficient use. A case in point, because of this mismatch, we have actually seen that there is not enough equivalent commercial or office space being built in the market to cater to these SMEs. And these, again, one of the problems that contribute to the misuse of industrial premises is really the limited availability of equivalent alternative office space for some of these SMEs. We've done a very brief analysis on the sites sold over the years with regards to sites that allow for industrial space development as well as those sites that would allow for office space development. Since 1990 till April this year, some 30.3 million square feet of space were generated from sites that are able to generate office space in GFA terms. And this is less than half of the 85.1 million generated from industrial sites. Taking it a step further, only 16.7% or 5.2 million of this 30 over million are actually strata titled office space. On the other hand, the level of strata titled industrial space that is generated from industrial sites over the years were 10 times this amount. Could it be that then part of the reason as to why we find companies or businesses whose activities are not so-called really evidently industrial in nature would still want to operate out from B1 space is because there is a lack of alternatives in the commercial sector? As well, could it be part of the reason as to why businesses whose functions still fall in a grey area under today's definition of users for industrial use still want to take the risk and operate out from B1 space is because, again, there's a lack of alternative equivalent in the commercial sector, and two, there are abundant supply of B1 space in the market, and B1 space is found almost in every part of Singapore. Almost. So, two questions for you. If this is such a case, then shouldn't a solution be found first before eviction plans are executed, leaving some of these businesses in the lurch? Number two, has a large proportion of Singapore's scarce land resources been channeled into the creation of industrial space supply, whereas our industrialists are unable to use for fear that they would be evicted or asked to leave a building that is inherently suitable for them? Food for thought again. Okay, now, in addition to the limited amount of equivalent space in the office sector. Of course, price affordability and rental affordability is also another factor driving some of these users into industrial premises. This chart shows a comparison between the median rents of office space in the central as well as the fringe areas, as well as those of multi-user flatted factories. You can see that they range from about 47 to 77% cheaper or less expensive compared to the office space in both the centralized as well as fringe areas. Similarly, prices are also much lower. So the imbalance in supply and demand in the market has actually caused some non-industrialists to vie for space with industrialists in the market. And developers being developers, they would develop what the market needs. And there is also an emergence, because of this, an emergence of shoebox industrial units. And this has actually spurred speculative as well as investor interest in the market. And in turn, we see an increase in price and rents of industrial property market. Now, if this gap in the if the gap in the understanding and the acknowledgement of the evolving manufacturing sector as well as evolving and changing industrial business formats is not being breached, and if it continues to grow, and it will if nothing is done, then the present tension that we see in the market amongst industrialists, especially the SMEs, will only intensify, and this is something that we do not wish to see. So how do we overcome the challenges? Come 2030, will there be suitable space for our small and medium enterprises? We feel that there is a need for clarity sooner rather than later, and we have been urging, and we do continue to urge now, that the policies makers do look into this soon. Review the planning parameters, review the land use zoning and the usage of industrial space. As the manufacturing sector modernizes, our real estate also must evolve. This would mean that there needs to be efficient and effective resource allocation. And to achieve this, we need the end users and the government to work together. Now, the SMEs or the end users, they will over time continue to innovate, they will continue to improve. But at the same time, we hope that the businesses are able to give feedback, constant feedback to the government, such that they will allow the government to understand how has the business changed, how has the real estate needs changed, how has activity being carried out in the market or in the premises changed. And with this understanding, then it provides a good platform for the government to take further steps. First, we would suggest a review or fine-tuning of the measures, or not measures, sorry, the guidelines or policies, and two, to also consider creating alternative supply in the commercial sector. In the review of the current zonings policies, perhaps the government could consider, being more open, consider a possible new zoning or a hybrid zoning in the form of, just to quote an example, in Hong Kong, there's a scheme called IO scheme, which is Industrial Office Scheme. Basically, it means that two forms of users exist within the same building. And of course, the users and the way the building is being designed and constructed needs to abide by the construction design and fire safety guidelines for both types of users. Then also in the review of the current land use and usage list, perhaps it would be very beneficial to the industry or the market if the government could consider the different functions that exist under various stages of an entire product life cycle. Because, again, falling back on what we've seen as a trend, the services and manufacturing divide has blurred. There's also a need to place importance in its review, place an importance in the growing prevalence of specialization and outsourcing. And then there is also a need to think or rethink the relevance of the 60% and 40% usage control on GFA. Is it still relevant? And again, business continuity, because this is very prevalent at the moment and it will continue to be so. The government also needs to review how our industrial premises is able to cater to this. On the other hand, there's also a need to, at the same time, increase or create the supply for the alternative or equivalent, I would like to call it, equivalent economical office space for the SMEs. If the government wishes to keep a clear line, between industrial activities and those that could probably fall out of it because they are grey at this moment under the current definitions, is to give them the option to go to an alternative place. And what the government could do is to create this through the sale of sites. And the land use plan that we discussed earlier on is that the government will look into creating another 13 million square meters of commercial space outside of the CBD by 2030, 17 years from now. So this actually provides the government ample opportunities to do this, to create economical office space. And the government can take this a step further. Perhaps it can actually, in its tender conditions, stipulate that selected sites be used for strata office space, be developed for strata titled office space. And what about the no-frills basic office space that HDB used to provide years ago? Perhaps the government can also consider bringing this back, whereby such office space exists outside of the centre near our housing estates as employment centres as well. HDB and JTC can also consider reserving certain pockets for the development of office space, the equivalent of the economical office space, when it redevelops some of these old existing industrial estates. And what about the underutilized properties that is under the stable of SLA? Perhaps this can also be used as a transitional kind of office space for temporary use by these SMEs, particularly those that have been evicted and left in a lurch. So this kind of companies could probably find temporary accommodation in the meantime. And because we emphasize that it is important for the government to understand the market first before anything is being done, the government, with its very vast and diverse multidisciplinary, multi-skilled departments and agencies under itself, could actually survey the market in collaboration with business associations, industrialists, to better understand what constitute manufacturing and industrial activity in the new economy. What are its linkages and how are the various types of industrial properties are being used? Because if the gap in the understanding of real estate demand in the new economy is not breached, then planning efforts will be futile, as scarce land resources will not be aligned effectively with industrial real needs as well as emerging opportunities. Now, whichever way the government chooses to overcome the challenges, the way or approach in which it is executed needs to be relevant. It needs to be updated in line with how the manufacturing sector has evolved, how the industries have evolved. The approach also must be fair and consistent across all parties and across all industries. It has to be non-discriminatory for it to be effective. At Colliers International, we have and we will continue to engage industry players, particularly the government, in this matter. To this end, to our friends in the industry, I would encourage you to exercise a lot of caution, a lot of due diligence when you advise your clients in the sourcing of space, in the sourcing of possible buyers or occupants. Do make sure that you understand the difference between the different types of users that is allowable in commercial space and industrial space. This is especially important because at this point in time, there are still a lot of gray areas. That is why it is very important to tread very carefully. You do not want to run afoul of the regulation that's at this point in time. This same message goes out to landlords and developers. And lastly, to our industrialists or businesses out there, if one fine day someone approaches you, someone from a properties consultancy firm like Collis International, or business associations or the government agencies, if they come up to you and seek to understand how you carry out your business, how you run your operations within your industrial premises, I would urge you to participate actively in it, because by helping the government understand how your businesses have changed, your business model have changed, and how you use your premises in line with your business model, by helping them understand that you are helping yourself ultimately. So on this note, thank you for your presence.